When my daughter-in-law called me a burden and kicked me to the curb with nothing but an eviction notice, she thought she'd finally gotten rid of the dead weight in their perfect little family. But 24 hours later, I walked back through their front door with something in my pocket that would change everything forever. What did I discover that turned their world completely upside down? My arthritis flares up as I grip the eviction notice, the paper crinkling under my shaking fingers while I sit in Tony's spotless kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee fills the air, but my stomach churns too much to even think about eating the breakfast I was invited for. Pepper stands at the granite counter, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen as she scrolls through social media, completely ignoring the tears streaming down my cheeks. My son Tony sits across from me, his eyes darting between his wife and his mother, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Pepper, please. I just need a few more weeks to figure this out," I whisper, holding up the notice that gives me 30 days to come up with 3 months of back rent or lose my apartment. The shame burns in my chest as I admit how far behind I've fallen since losing my job at the grocery store. At 62, nobody wants to hire someone with grey hair and slow movements, even though I can still work circles around people half my age. The unemployment checks ran out months ago, and my small savings disappeared paying for my heart medication that insurance wouldn't cover. Pepper finally looks up from her phone, rolling her eyes so dramatically that I wonder if she practiced that expression in the mirror. "Look, Mom Rogers, we can't keep covering your rent forever," she says, her voice dripping with the kind of fake sweetness that makes my skin crawl. She doesn't even have the decency to look embarrassed about the lie. They've never paid a single penny of my rent. Never even offered to help with groceries when I mentioned eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 nights in a row. "You're becoming a real burden on our family," Pepper continues, setting down her phone and crossing her arms like she's delivering some kind of important business presentation. The words hit me like a slap across the face, and I feel my whole body recoil. Tony shifts uncomfortably in his chair, finally looking up from his coffee mug, but he doesn't say anything to defend me. The silence stretches on for what feels like hours, with only the sound of little Peter playing with his toys in the living room, completely unaware that his grandmother's world is falling apart. I think about all the nights I worked double shifts at the diner when Tony was growing up, coming home with my feet bleeding in my shoes, just so he could have new school clothes and decent meals. I remember selling my wedding ring when he needed money for college textbooks, telling him it was no big deal even though it broke my heart to see it disappear into the pawn shop. The sacrifices I made raising him alone after his father died in that car accident seem meaningless now, sitting here begging for help from the family I gave everything for. I raised Tony for 18 years after his father died. I say, my voice growing stronger as anger starts replacing the hurt. I worked 3 jobs to put him through college. And this is how you repay me? My hands stop shaking as the words pour out. 15 years of biting my tongue finally coming to an end. Pepper's face hardens, and she leans forward like she's getting ready for a fight she's been wanting to have for years. "That was your choice, not ours." She snaps back, her mask of fake politeness completely gone now. "We have our own family to think about now." She gestures toward the living room where Peter is building a tower with his blocks, his little voice making sound effects for his imaginary construction crew. The irony isn't lost on me that she's using my grandson as a weapon against me, when I'm the one who babysits him every weekend without asking for gas money or payment. Tony finally speaks up, but his words cut deeper than his wife's calculated cruelty. "Mom, maybe Pepper's right," he says quietly, still not meeting my eyes. "Maybe it's time you figured out how to stand on your own." The betrayal feels like a physical blow to my chest, stealing my breath and making my vision blur with fresh tears. This is my son, the baby I rock to sleep every night. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, telling me I'm too much trouble for his precious new family. I feel something break inside me. Not just my heart, but something deeper and more fundamental. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to snaps. And suddenly I'm not sad anymore. I'm furious. These people who have never missed a meal, never worried about keeping the lights on, never had to choose between medicine and rent, are lecturing me about standing on my own. They live in this beautiful house with their 2-car garage and granite countertops, taking family vacations to Disney World while I'm rationing my blood pressure pills to make them last longer. "You know what? You're absolutely right, I say, standing up from the table with more dignity than I've felt in months. Pepper looks surprised by my calm tone, probably expecting more tears and begging. Tony glances up with relief, thinking I'm about to make this easy for him by just walking away. Neither of them understands that they've just awakened something in me that's been sleeping for too long, something that built a life from nothing after my husband died and raised a successful son through sheer determination and love. I walk over to the living room and kneel down next to Peter, who's building the most elaborate block tower I've ever seen. That's beautiful, sweetheart, I tell him, kissing the top of his head and breathing in that little boy smell of shampoo and innocence. He grins up at me with the same smile Tony had at that age, before life taught him to choose sides and abandon family when it becomes inconvenient. Are you leaving, Grandma? Peter asks, and I can hear the disappointment in his voice. He loves our weekend adventures to the park and the library, our trips to get ice cream and feed the ducks at the pond. I'm probably the only adult in his life who isn't constantly staring at a phone or rushing off to the next important appointment. Just for a little while, I tell him, though I suspect it might be much longer than that. But I'll see you soon, okay? He nods and goes back to his blocks, trusting in the way only children can that adults will keep their promises. I stand up and walk back to the kitchen, where Tony and Pepper are whispering urgently to each other, probably planning how to spin this story to make themselves look like the victims. I'll figure out how to stand on my own, I announce, picking up my purse and the eviction notice. Thank you both for making it so clear where I stand with this family. Pepper has the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but Tony just nods like I've finally seen reason. They have no idea that they've just made the biggest mistake of their lives, that the sweet old lady they just dismissed as a burden is about to remind them exactly what she's capable of when pushed too far. I walk out of their house with my head held high, even though my heart is breaking into a million pieces. The rain starts falling as I reach my car, fat drops that match the tears I refuse to let them see. But as I drive away from the house where I'm no longer welcome, I'm already thinking about the life insurance money from my husband that I've never touched, the inheritance from my mother that's been sitting in a savings account for 10 years, and the retirement fund I've been too scared to use. Maybe it's time to stop being scared and start being strategic. The rain pounds against my windshield as I drive aimlessly through neighborhoods I can't afford, past houses filled with families who probably don't call their elderly relatives burdens. My wipers squeak with each pass, creating a rhythm that matches the angry beating of my heart. I keep replaying Pepper's words, the way she said burden like I was something disgusting she needed to scrape off her shoe. The humiliation burns in my chest, but underneath it, something else is growing stronger with each mile I drive. I pull into the parking lot of Eddie's Diner, the same place where I worked for 8 years before my heart problems forced me to quit. Through the rain-streaked windows, I can see my old co-workers rushing around during the lunch rush. The same controlled chaos I used to navigate with grace. My hands grip the steering wheel as I remember all the nights I came home exhausted, my feet screaming in pain, counting tips on my kitchen table to make sure I could pay Tony's college expenses. Mary, my old supervisor, knocks on my car window with a concerned expression. I roll it down, and she immediately notices my red eyes and defeated posture. "Helen, honey, what's wrong?" she asks, rain dripping from her grey hair as she leans down to my level. Before I know it, the whole story pours out of me like water from a broken dam. The eviction notice, begging my son for help, Pepper's cruel words, Tony's betrayal. Mary listens without judgment, her weathered face growing angrier with each detail. That spoiled little princess has no idea what real struggle looks like, Mary says, her voice fierce with protective anger. And your son needs a reality check about what family means. She pauses, looking thoughtful despite the rain soaking her uniform. You know, Helen, you've been talking about them buying that house they're renting for the past year. Always going on about how they'll never be able to afford it, how the landlord will probably sell it to some developer. Something clicks in my brain, a puzzle piece falling into place with an almost audible snap. That house, the beautiful three-story colonial with the wraparound porch and the big backyard where Peter plays. They've been renting it for 2 years, always complaining about the rent but loving the neighborhood, the good schools, the prestige of the address. Pepper posts pictures of it on social media, like she owns it, carefully cropping out the "for rent" sign that used to sit in the front yard. Mary, you're a genius, I say, feeling energized for the first time in months. She grins and pats my shoulder through the open window. Whatever you're planning, honey, just remember that revenge is a dish best served cold. And you've got plenty of time to let it chill. I roll up my window and drive toward the fancy part of town where Tony and Pepper live, my mind racing with possibilities I'd never considered before. The house looks even more impressive in the rain, its brick facade and perfectly manicured lawn screaming money and success. I park across the street and study it like I'm seeing it for the first time. The "for sale" sign in the front yard is small and discreet, the kind that rich people use when they don't want to advertise their business to the whole neighborhood. My heart starts pounding as I read the realtor's name and phone number, memorizing the information before I lose my nerve. I drive to the library downtown, the same one where I used to take Tony when he was Peter's age. The computers are free, and I need to do research without leaving a trail on my own ancient laptop. My fingers shake as I type in the address, and the property listing loads slowly on the old machine. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, 2,400 square feet, built in 1987. Listed at $380,000, which seems impossible until I remember that I've been poor for so long I've forgotten what things actually cost. I spend 2 hours researching everything I can find about the house, the neighborhood, and the real estate market. Property values have skyrocketed in this area over the past 5 years, turning modest family homes into luxury investments. The house Tony and Pepper rent would have sold for maybe $200,000 when they first moved in, but now it's worth nearly twice that. No wonder they feel trapped, paying rent on a house they'll never be able to buy. My next stop is the bank, where I sit across from a financial advisor named Jennifer, who looks young enough to be my granddaughter. She pulls up my accounts on her computer, and I watch her eyebrows rise as she sees numbers I'd forgotten I had. The life insurance payout from Robert's death 20 years ago, invested conservatively and growing slowly but steadily. My mother's inheritance from when she passed 5 years ago, money I never touched because it felt wrong to spend it on myself. My retirement account that I've been contributing to for 40 years, even when it meant eating ramen noodles for dinner. Mrs. Rogers, you have quite a bit more than you realized, Jennifer says, her voice respectful in a way that surprises me. Between all your accounts, you're looking at approximately $400,000 in liquid assets. The number hits me like a physical blow. I've been living like a pauper, rationing my medications and skipping meals while sitting on enough money to buy my son's house outright. What would I need to make a cash offer on a property? I ask, trying to keep my voice casual. Jennifer's eyes light up with professional interest. Cash offers are very attractive to sellers, especially if they need to close quickly. You'd need proof of funds, a pre-approval letter, and a good real estate agent who can move fast. She slides a business card across the desk. My brother-in-law, Mark, specializes in quick closings. He's helped several of our clients purchase homes with cash offers. I sit in my car outside the bank for 20 minutes, staring at Mark's business card and feeling like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about respect, about showing Tony and Pepper that the burden they tried to discard has more power than they ever imagined. My phone buzzes with a text message from Tony. Mom, sorry about today. Pepper was stressed about work. Want to come over for dinner Sunday? The casual dismissal of this morning's cruelty, the assumption that I'll just forgive and forget, makes my decision for me. I dial Mark's number before I can change my mind. He answers on the second ring, his voice warm and professional. Mark Davidson, Davidson Realty. How can I help you? I take a deep breath and step off the cliff. I'd like to make a cash offer on a house, and I need to close as quickly as possible. We meet at a coffee shop near the house, and Mark turns out to be exactly what I need. Experienced, discreet, and hungry for a commission. He's already pulled the listing details and comparable sales data before I arrive. The house has been on the market for 6 weeks, he explains, spreading papers across the small table. That's longer than expected for this neighborhood, which means the seller might be motivated to negotiate. What kind of offer would get their attention? I ask, my heart pounding so hard I'm sure he can hear it. Mark studies the listing sheet and taps his pen against the table. The asking price is $380, but I think we could get it for $350, maybe even $340, if we can close in 2 weeks. Cash offers move fast, and sellers love the certainty of not dealing with mortgage complications. I think about Tony and Pepper sitting in their living room right now, probably laughing about how easily they got rid of their burden. They have no idea that their landlord has been trying to sell the house they love for over a month, or that their discarded mother-in-law is about to become their new landlord. The irony is so perfect it almost makes me laugh out loud. Let's make an offer for $350,000, I say, surprised by how steady my voice sounds. But I have one condition that's non-negotiable. Mark looks up from his papers with professional curiosity. The current tenants have to be allowed to stay under the same lease terms, at least initially. I don't want them displaced during the transition. He nods approvingly, probably thinking I'm just a kind-hearted old lady who doesn't want to disrupt a family's life. That's very considerate, Mrs. Rogers. Most investors would have cleared out the tenants immediately to raise the rent or sell it again. If he only knew that those tenants are my son and daughter-in-law, and that I'm not being considerate at all. I'm being strategic. They called me a burden, and I'm about to show them what a real burden looks like. Mark makes the call to the listing agent. While I sit there, my hands folded in my lap like I'm praying. In a way, I suppose I am. I'm praying for strength, for courage, and for the sweet satisfaction of watching Pepper's face when she realizes that her burden has just become her landlord. The conversation seems to go on forever, but finally Mark hangs up with a huge grin on his face. They accepted your offer, Mrs. Rogers. $350, 2-week closing. And they're happy to keep the current tenants in place. Congratulations, you just bought yourself a house. The words wash over me like warm water, and for the first time in months, I feel truly powerful. I'm not a burden anymore. I'm a property owner, a landlord. And most importantly, I'm a woman who just turned the tables on the family that tried to throw her away. As I drive home to my little apartment, the eviction notice still sitting on my passenger seat, I allow myself a small smile. Tony and Pepper have no idea what's coming their way. They think they've solved their problem by getting rid of their burden, but they've actually created a much bigger problem for themselves. And I can't wait to see their faces when they find out exactly who their new landlord is. 2 weeks pass like lightning, and I'm sitting in Mark's office signing papers that will make me the owner of my son's house. My hands barely shake now as I write my signature across document after document, each one sealing Tony and Pepper's fate without them having the slightest clue. The title company representative, a serious woman named Mrs. Chen, slides the final deed across the mahogany table with a satisfied smile. Congratulations, Mrs. Rogers. You are now the official owner of 47 Maple Street. The keys feel heavy in my palm, like they carry the weight of 15 years of sacrifice and humiliation that are about to be repaid in full. Mark shakes my hand and promises to handle all the paperwork with the county records office, ensuring that the property transfer is completely legal and binding. I've learned more about real estate law in the past 2 weeks than I ever thought possible, spending hours at the library researching tenant rights, landlord responsibilities, and exactly what I can and cannot do as the new property owner. Knowledge is power, and I intend to wield that power carefully and completely within the bounds of the law. My phone buzzes with a text from Tony as I walk to my car. Mom, want to come over for dinner tonight? Pepper made your favorite pot roast. The irony almost makes me laugh out loud. Pepper has never made pot roast in her life, and she certainly doesn't know what my favorite anything is. This is clearly Tony's clumsy attempt to smooth over the disaster from 2 weeks ago, probably because his guilty conscience is finally catching up with him. I text back immediately. I'll be there at 6. We need to talk. I spend the afternoon at my lawyer's office, a kind man named Mr. Peterson who specializes in landlord-tenant law. He reviews the existing lease agreement that Tony and Pepper signed with the previous owner, explaining my rights and responsibilities as the new landlord. The lease transfers with the property, he tells me, adjusting his reading glasses. You're bound by the same terms they agreed to, at least until the lease expires or you give proper notice for any changes. I nod thoughtfully, already planning my next moves with the precision of a chess master. However, Mr. Peterson continues, you do have the right to inspect the property with proper notice, collect rent according to the lease terms, and enforce all existing rules and regulations. If they violate the lease in any way, you have grounds for eviction. He slides a packet of legal forms across his desk. These are standard notices and documents you might need. I'd recommend keeping detailed records of all interactions with your tenants, just in case things get complicated. At exactly 6 o'clock, I pull into the driveway of my house, savoring those 2 words, more than I ever thought possible. The landscaping looks immaculate, which makes sense since Tony has always been particular about appearances. The irony that he's been maintaining my property for the past 2 years isn't lost on me. I walk up to the front door with my keys jingling softly in my pocket, each small sound like a symphony of sweet revenge about to unfold. Pepper opens the door with her usual forced smile, but I can see the tension around her eyes. She's clearly still uncomfortable about our last conversation, probably worried that I might cause a scene in front of Peter. Hi, Mom Rogers. Come on in. Dinner smells amazing, doesn't it? She leads me toward the kitchen, chattering nervously about the weather and Peter's upcoming school play, filling the silence with meaningless words because she doesn't know how to address the elephant in the room. Tony is helping Peter with homework at the kitchen table, the same table where they broke my heart 2 weeks ago. The smell of pot roast fills the air, though I suspect it came from the expensive prepared food section of the grocery store rather than Pepper's kitchen skills. Hey, Mom, Tony says, standing up to give me an awkward hug. Thanks for coming. I know things got a little heated last time, and we wanted to clear the air. I settle into the same chair I occupied during my humiliation, but this time I feel completely different. The power dynamic has shifted so dramatically that I almost feel sorry for them. Almost. Actually, I have some news that affects all of us, I announce, pulling the property deed from my purse and placing it carefully on the table. The legal document looks official and intimidating against the cheerful placemats, like a bomb disguised as paperwork. Pepper glances at the document with casual curiosity, probably assuming it's something related to my eviction or housing search. Tony picks it up first, his eyes scanning the legal language with growing confusion. I watch his face transform from puzzlement to shock to complete disbelief as the reality sinks in. Mom, what is this? He whispers, his voice barely audible over the sound of Peter practicing his multiplication tables in the background. It's the deed to this house, sweetheart, I say calmly, enjoying every second of his stunned expression. I bought it 2 weeks ago with a cash offer. The previous owner was very motivated to sell quickly, and I was motivated to buy. The silence that follows is so complete, I can hear the refrigerator humming and the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Even Peter stops practicing his math problems, sensing that something important is happening. Pepper snatches the deed from Tony's trembling hands, her eyes darting across the page like she's looking for evidence that this is all some elaborate joke. But legal documents don't lie, and the official county seal makes it impossible to deny. This is impossible, she says, her voice rising with panic. You don't have this kind of money. You were getting evicted. Her perfect composure cracks completely, revealing the ugly truth beneath her polished exterior. That's the funny thing about being called a burden. I reply, my voice steady and calm. It makes you take a hard look at your finances and realize exactly what you're worth. I lean back in my chair, feeling more comfortable in this house than I have in years. Turns out that 30 years of marriage to Tony's father, plus my mother's inheritance, plus my retirement savings equals exactly enough to buy this beautiful home. Tony's face cycles through a dozen different emotions as he processes what this means for his family. Shock gives way to embarrassment, then to anger, then to something that might be respect. He's finally starting to understand that his mother isn't the helpless old woman he thought he could dismiss so easily. The eviction notice, he says slowly. What about your apartment? Oh, I'm still getting evicted, I say cheerfully. But it turns out I don't need that apartment anymore. I'm thinking about moving into the guest room upstairs. After all, it's my house now. Pepper makes a choking sound, like she's trying to swallow a scream, and Tony just stares at me with his mouth hanging open. The transformation from burden to property owner has happened so quickly they can't process it. You can't do this to us, Pepper finally manages to say, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. We have rights. We have a lease. She's grasping for any legal protection she can think of. But I've already done my homework. Mr. Peterson prepared me for this exact reaction, and I'm ready with my response. You absolutely have rights. I agree, pulling out a folder of legal documents that I had prepared for this moment. As my tenants, your lease with the previous owner transfers to me automatically, which means you have the same terms and protections you've always had. Rent is due on the first of every month, $2,800, and I'm afraid the lease doesn't include any family discounts. The number hits them like a physical blow. $2,800 a month is a fortune for most people, but they've been paying it for 2 years without complaint because they love this house and this neighborhood. Now they're faced with paying that same amount to the woman they called a burden. And the irony is so perfect it takes my breath away. We need to think about this, Tony says quietly, and I can see him doing mental calculations. Without my help, which they've made clear they don't want, they're trapped paying rent to their own family member. The woman they tried to discard now holds their housing security in her hands, and we all know it. Peter looks up from his homework with innocent curiosity. Grandma, does this mean you're going to live with us? His sweet voice cuts through the adult tension like a knife, and I feel my heart soften despite everything his parents have put me through. This little boy has done nothing wrong, and I won't let him suffer for his parents' mistakes. We'll see, sweetheart, I tell him, reaching over to ruffle his hair. But I'll definitely be around more often. Is that okay with you? His face lights up with genuine joy, and he nods enthusiastically. At least one person in this family is happy about my new role as landlord. Pepper excuses herself from the table, claiming she needs to check on dinner, but I can see her hands shaking as she opens the oven. The pot roast is clearly store-bought, just as I suspected, but I don't call her out on the lie. I have bigger battles to fight now, and pointing out her domestic failures seems petty compared to the war I've already won. Tony sits in stunned silence, occasionally glancing at the deed like he's hoping it will disappear if he stares at it long enough. The son who told me to stand on my own 2 weeks ago is now faced with the reality that I've done exactly that, and his new standing ground happens to be land that I own. The tables haven't just turned, they've been completely rebuilt with me at the head. Pepper storms back from the kitchen carrying a serving platter like it's a weapon, her face flushed red with anger and humiliation. The store-bought pot roast sits between us like an elephant in the room, nobody acknowledging that this elaborate dinner was clearly thrown together at the last minute to butter me up. She slams the platter down harder than necessary, making the gravy slosh over the sides and stain her pristine white tablecloth. So what's your plan here, Mom Rogers? She asks, her voice dripping with sarcasm and barely controlled rage. Are you planning to evict us out of spite? I take my time cutting a piece of the pot roast, chewing slowly while she waits for my answer. The meat is actually quite good, though I'd never give her the satisfaction of saying so. Evict you? I say finally, dabbing my mouth with the cloth napkin. Why would I evict good tenants who pay their rent on time and take care of the property? The word tenants hangs in the air like a sword, and I can see both Tony and Pepper flinch at the reminder of their new status in this house. Tony finds his voice, though it comes out smaller than usual. Mom, this is insane. We're family. You can't treat us like strangers who just rent from you. There's a pleading quality to his words that reminds me of when he was a little boy asking for a later bedtime. But those days of maternal softness are over, burned away by 2 weeks of careful planning and the memory of being called a burden in this very room. Family. I repeat slowly, like I'm tasting the word for the first time. That's interesting, Tony. 2 weeks ago, your wife made it very clear that I was a burden to this family. Now you want to claim family status when it's convenient for you. I reach into my purse and pull out the rental agreement that Mr. Peterson helped me draft, sliding it across the table toward them. This is your new lease agreement. Same terms as before, but now you're paying me instead of some stranger. Pepper's eyes scan the document with the intensity of a lawyer looking for loopholes. Her real estate background means she understands contracts better than Tony, and I can see her face growing paler as she reads each clause. This is a standard residential lease, she says slowly, like she can't believe what she's seeing. You've made this completely businesslike. No family considerations, no special terms, nothing that acknowledges our relationship. Exactly, I say, taking another bite of pot roast. You wanted me to stand on my own, so I did. You didn't want a burden in your family, so now you have a landlord instead. It's amazing how quickly things can shift when you get exactly what you ask for. The satisfaction in my voice is unmistakable, and I don't bother trying to hide it. They deserve to squirm after what they put me through. Little Peter looks back and forth between the adults, clearly sensing the tension even though he doesn't understand the legal implications. Grandma, are you going to live in our house now? He asks with the innocent curiosity of a 7-year-old. His question cuts through the adult drama and reminds everyone that there's a child caught in the middle of this family war. This is my house now, sweetheart, I tell him gently, my voice softening for the first time since I arrived. But your mummy and daddy have a lease that lets them live here too. Think of it like I'm the captain of the ship, and they're very important passengers. Peter nods solemnly, accepting this explanation with the adaptability that children possess. If only adults could adjust to new realities so easily. Pepper suddenly stands up from the table, pacing around the dining room like a trapped animal. Her heels click against the hardwood floors that I now own, and every step seems to remind her of her changed circumstances. This is vindictive and petty, she announces, spinning around to face me with her arms crossed. You're doing this to punish us for one conversation where emotions ran high. One conversation? I set down my fork and look at her directly. Pepper, you've been treating me like an inconvenience for 3 years. The burden comment was just the final straw that broke my patience. I pull out my phone and scroll to a folder I've created over the past 2 weeks. I've been documenting our interactions and the pattern is quite clear. Tony leans forward with curiosity and dread. What kind of documentation? He asks. Though his voice suggests he already knows the answer won't be pleasant. I turn my phone screen toward him, showing screenshots of text messages, photos, and a detailed journal I've been keeping since I started planning my revenge. Every cancelled dinner invitation, every time you were too busy to help with grocery shopping, every family gathering where I was treated like a third wheel, I list calmly. The Christmas where you forgot to buy me a gift but spent $300 on the mailman's tip. The birthday dinner where you spent the entire meal on your phones and left me to pay the check. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. Tony's face grows redder with each item I mention, and Pepper stops pacing to stare at my phone screen. They can't argue with screenshots and dated journal entries, and the accumulation of small slights suddenly looks like a pattern of deliberate cruelty when laid out chronologically. I also have documentation of my financial contributions to this family. I continue, swiping to another folder. The $500 I gave you for Peter's school fundraiser last year. The emergency loan when your car broke down that you never mentioned paying back. The countless hours of free babysitting that would have cost you $15 an hour if you'd hired someone else. The room falls silent except for the sound of Peter colouring at the kitchen counter, completely absorbed in his artwork and oblivious to the financial calculations destroying his parents' argument. Tony runs his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he's had since childhood, and I can see him adding up numbers in his head. "Mom, we didn't realise," he starts, but I hold up my hand to stop him. "You didn't realise because you didn't want to realise," I say firmly. "It was easier to see me as a burden than to acknowledge how much I was actually contributing to your comfortable lifestyle. Well, now I'm contributing in a different way. I'm providing you with housing, and you're providing me with rental income. It's a purely business relationship, which seems to be what you prefer." Pepper sits back down heavily, the fight going out of her as the reality of their situation sinks in. "What do you want from us?" she asks quietly. And for the first time since I've known her, she sounds genuinely humble. The entitlement and superiority are gone, replaced by the recognition that she's lost this battle completely. "I want respect," I answer simply. "I want to be treated like the family member who sacrificed everything to raise Tony, not like some inconvenient obligation you're stuck with. I want my grandson to know his grandmother as someone strong and capable, not as a burden his parents complain about." My voice gets stronger with each demand, and I can see both of them shrinking back in their chairs. Tony reaches across the table and takes my hand, his eyes filled with tears I haven't seen since his father's funeral. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. And I let Pepper influence me when I should have stood up for you. The apology feels genuine, but I don't let it soften my resolve. Words are easy when you're trapped and desperate. Sorry doesn't pay back 15 years of taking me for granted. I tell him, though I don't pull my hand away. But actions might. You have a choice now. You can be respectful tenants who happen to be my family, or you can be difficult tenants who get treated according to the lease agreement. The decision is entirely up to you." Pepper looks at the lease agreement again, and I can see her calculating the costs of moving versus the humiliation of paying rent to her mother-in-law. With their credit and income, finding another house in this neighborhood would be nearly impossible, especially with rental prices climbing every month. They're trapped by their own circumstances and my careful planning. "The rent is the same as what you've been paying," I point out reasonably. "The only thing that's changed is who you write the check to. If you can swallow your pride and treat me with basic human decency, this arrangement could work out well for everyone." I pause to let that sink in before delivering my final condition. "But if you ever call me a burden again or treat me like one, I'll exercise my rights as a landlord to the fullest extent of the law." Peter runs over from the kitchen counter with his finished artwork, a crayon drawing of a house with stick figures standing in front of it. "Look, Grandma, I drew our family at your house." The innocence of his words hits everyone differently. To him, this is just an interesting development where his beloved grandmother gets to live closer to him. He doesn't understand the complex adult emotions swirling around the dinner table. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I tell him, accepting the drawing with genuine warmth. "Should we put it on the refrigerator?" He nods eagerly, and I walk with him to the kitchen, leaving Tony and Pepper alone to process their new reality. As I help Peter find a magnet for his artwork, I can hear them whispering urgently in the dining room, probably trying to figure out their next move. When I return to the table, they're both looking at me with a mixture of resignation and newfound respect. The power dynamic has completely shifted, and we all know it. "So," Tony says carefully, "what happens now?" His question hangs in the air like a prayer, hope and fear balanced on a knife's edge. I sit back down and finish my pot roast before answering, letting them wait while I consider their future. The woman they called a burden now holds their housing security, their neighborhood status, and their family stability in her hands. The irony is so perfect it almost makes me smile, but I maintain my serious expression. Now you sign the lease agreement, and we see if you've learned anything about treating family with respect. I say finally. The first month's rent is due tomorrow, just like it would be with any other landlord. After that, we'll take it 1 month at a time and see how well you adjust to your new circumstances. 3 days after signing the lease agreement, Pepper launches her counterattack with the ruthless efficiency of a woman who's built her career on manipulating people's emotions. She's invited Tony's entire extended family to what she calls an emergency intervention at our neighborhood community center, turning my moment of triumph into a public trial where I'm clearly meant to be the villain. I walk into the meeting room to find my sister Margaret, Tony's cousins, Lisa and David, and even my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, all sitting in a circle like they're planning an exorcism. Thank you all for coming, Pepper begins, her voice dripping with fake concern as she stands at the front of the room like she's leading a support group. We're here because Helen has had some kind of breakdown and made a terrible financial decision that's going to hurt everyone in the family. She's dressed in her most conservative outfit, playing the role of the worried daughter-in-law who just wants what's best for everyone. The performance is so convincing that I almost believe it myself. Margaret, my own sister, who I've bailed out of financial trouble more times than I can count, nods sympathetically. Helen, honey, we're all worried about you. Buying Tony's house seems like such an extreme reaction to a little family disagreement. Her condescending tone makes my blood boil, especially since she's conveniently forgotten that I loaned her $10,000 last year when her husband lost his job. The family selective memory syndrome is apparently contagious. A little disagreement? I repeat, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Your nephew's wife called me a burden and suggested I was ruining their family by needing help during the worst crisis of my life. I look around the room at these people who are supposed to care about me, seeing doubt and judgment in their faces instead of support. Pepper has done her homework, probably calling each of them individually to share her version of events. Tony's cousin David, who I helped put through trade school 15 years ago, shifts uncomfortably in his plastic chair. Aunt Helen, maybe you misunderstood what Pepper meant. She's been under a lot of stress with work and the kids. The betrayal cuts deep because David knows exactly what kind of person I am and what I've sacrificed for this family. But Pepper's narrative is more comfortable than the truth, so he's choosing to believe her version. I have the entire conversation recorded on my phone. I announce, pulling out my device and setting it on the table between us. The room falls silent as I explain how I've been documenting family interactions for months, building a case that I never thought I'd need to use. Would you like to hear exactly what was said, or would you prefer to keep making assumptions based on Pepper's version of events? The offer to play the recording shifts the power dynamics immediately. Pepper's face goes pale because she knows exactly what's on that audio file, and it's not going to support her narrative of the stressed daughter-in-law dealing with an unreasonable mother-in-law. Tony looks like he wants to disappear into the floor, probably remembering his own shameful role in that kitchen confrontation. Mrs. Patterson, who's known me for 20 years, speaks up with the authority of age and experience. Helen, dear, I think we should hear what really happened before we make any judgments. Her support gives me courage, and I press play on the recording, letting my family hear Pepper's cruel words and Tony's cowardly agreement in their full, unedited context. The audio plays for 3 excruciating minutes, and I watch each face in the room transform as they hear the real conversation. Margaret's expression shifts from concern to horror as she realizes how badly Pepper treated me. David's defensive posture crumbles when he hears Tony tell his own mother that maybe it's time she figured out how to stand on her own. By the time the recording ends, the room is so quiet, I can hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling. Well, Margaret says slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, that certainly changes things. She's looking at Pepper with undisguised disgust, and I can see the family alliances shifting in real time. The woman who was leading this intervention 5 minutes ago is now isolated and exposed, her carefully constructed narrative demolished by the truth. Pepper tries to salvage the situation with desperate damage control. You can't just record private family conversations and use them against people, she protests, but her voice lacks conviction. That's a violation of trust and privacy. She's grasping for moral high ground that she lost the moment she called her elderly mother-in-law a burden. And everyone in the room knows it. Trust. I stand up slowly, feeling the weight of every person's attention focused on me. Let's talk about trust, Pepper. You trusted that I would never stand up for myself. You trusted that my family would automatically take your side without hearing my story. You trusted that calling me a burden would make me disappear quietly without causing any trouble. I paused to let each accusation sink in before delivering the final blow. The only thing you didn't trust was that I might have more resources and determination than you gave me credit for. Lisa, Tony's youngest cousin who I helped raise after her parents divorced, finally speaks up with tears in her eyes. Aunt Helen, I had no idea they were treating you like this. If I'd known, I would have said something. Her words feel genuine, unlike the calculated sympathy I've been hearing from others. And I feel a small crack in the wall of anger I've built around my heart. That's exactly the problem, Lisa. I tell her gently. Nobody knew because nobody asked. It was easier to assume I was being dramatic or oversensitive than to look at the pattern of how I've been treated. I pull out my documentation folder, the same one I showed Tony and Pepper, and spread the evidence across the community center table like a prosecutor presenting a case. The room erupts in shocked murmurs as my family sees the breadth of evidence I've collected. Photos of family gatherings where I'm clearly being ignored, screenshots of cancelled plans and forgotten birthdays, financial records showing my contributions that were never acknowledged or repaid. The cumulative effect is devastating, turning what Pepper portrayed as an overreaction into a carefully documented case of family neglect and abuse. David picks up a bank statement showing the loan I gave him for trade school, his face flushing red with shame. Aunt Helen, I never realized how much you've done for all of us. His voice breaks slightly, and I can see him calculating years of support and sacrifice that he took for granted. The awakening is painful but necessary, and I feel no satisfaction in watching him squirm. Margaret studies a photo from last Christmas where I'm sitting alone at the end of the table while everyone else is engaged in animated conversation. Helen, why didn't you tell me things were this bad? She asks. But we both know the answer. She was too busy with her own problems to notice mine, and I was too proud to admit how isolated I'd become in my own family. Because, I say simply, everyone was too comfortable with the status quo to want to hear about my problems. It was easier for all of you to let Pepper and Tony handle the burden of dealing with me than to examine your own behavior. The word burden lands like a slap, and I can see several people flinch at the reminder of how I've been characterized. Pepper makes one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. This is all ancient history, she declares, her voice taking on a shrill quality that betrays her panic. What matters now is that Helen has made a crazy financial decision that could hurt Tony and Peter's future. She's being vindictive and using money as a weapon to get revenge on her own family. The accusation hangs in the air for a moment before Mrs. Patterson, bless her soul, starts laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-belly laugh that echoes through the community centre and breaks the tension like a hammer shattering glass. Vindictive? She gasps between laughs. The woman bought her son's house to keep him from being homeless, and you call it vindictive? Helen could have kicked them out immediately. Mrs. Patterson continues, wiping tears from her eyes. She could have raised the rent to market value, which would be about $600 more than they're paying now. She could have sold the house to developers who would have torn it down for condos. Instead, she's letting them stay at the same rent with the same lease terms. The logic is unassailable, and I watch Pepper's last argument crumble under the weight of basic common sense. Tony, who has been silent throughout this entire confrontation, finally speaks up with a voice so quiet we all have to lean forward to hear him. "Mom is right," he says, not looking at his wife. "We treated her terribly, and she responded by making sure we still have a home. If anyone else had bought this house, we would have been evicted immediately." His admission feels like a victory, but it's a hollow one because it comes too late to undo the damage. The meeting that was supposed to be my public humiliation has turned into Pepper's complete exposure and defeat. My family members are apologizing, offering support, and expressing shame about their previous behavior. But I feel no joy in their recognition, because it only came after I proved I had power and resources. Where were these people when I was just a struggling elderly woman who needed help? As the meeting breaks up with promises of better communication and family support, I realize that something fundamental has shifted in my relationships with these people. They don't see me as a burden anymore, but they also don't see me as the same person I was before. I've become something new, a family member with power, resources, and the willingness to use both when pushed too far. Pepper leaves without speaking to anyone, her humiliation complete, and her influence over family narratives destroyed. Tony lingers behind, clearly wanting to talk, but I'm not ready for that conversation yet. The taste of victory is bitter when it comes at the cost of destroying family relationships that should have been based on love and respect from the beginning. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my beautiful garden behind the house that is undeniably mine, watching Peter play on the swing set that I had installed as my first major property improvement. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm more comfortable in this house as the landlord than I ever was as the unwelcome guest, and the transformation in family dynamics has been more dramatic than I could have imagined. Tony brings me coffee every morning without being asked. Pepper actually says please and thank you when requesting anything. And my grandson gets to see his grandmother as someone strong and independent rather than a burden his parents complain about. The rental arrangement has evolved into something unexpectedly positive, though it took months of careful boundary setting and awkward negotiations to reach this point. Tony and Pepper pay their rent on time every month, treat the property with respect, and have learned to include me in family decisions rather than working around me. The woman who was once called a burden is now consulted about everything from Peter's school activities to major household purchases because they've finally realized that dismissing my input has consequences. Pepper approaches me cautiously, carrying a plate of homemade cookies that actually smell like they came from our kitchen rather than a store package. "Mrs. Rogers, I wanted to thank you for agreeing to let my mother visit for Thanksgiving," she says, her voice containing genuine gratitude rather than the fake sweetness I remember. "I know having house guests changes the dynamic, and I appreciate your flexibility as our landlord." The formal address of Mrs. Rogers, instead of the dismissive Mom Rogers, represents a shift in respect that took months to establish. We're not friends, and we may never be, but we've reached a professional courtesy that protects everyone's dignity while acknowledging the reality of our relationship. She's learned that treating me well benefits everyone in the house, while treating me poorly has immediate and uncomfortable consequences. Peter is excited to meet his other grandmother. I reply diplomatically, accepting the peace offering of cookies. And I'm looking forward to hosting a proper Thanksgiving dinner in my dining room. The emphasis on my is subtle but deliberate, a gentle reminder that this generosity comes from a position of power rather than obligation. The boundaries are clear, even when the gestures are kind. Tony emerges from the house carrying a folder of documents, his weekly ritual of updating me on property maintenance issues and household expenses. The man who once told me to stand on my own has become surprisingly attentive to his landlord's needs, probably because he's realized how much easier his life is when I'm happy with the living arrangements. "Mom, the heating system inspection is scheduled for next Tuesday, and I've got 3 quotes for fixing the front porch railing like you requested." The relationship with my son has been the most complex to navigate, balancing the roles of mother and landlord while rebuilding trust that was shattered by months of neglect and dismissal. He's genuinely remorseful about his behavior, but I've learned that remorse without changed actions is just another form of manipulation. The proof of his transformation is in these small daily courtesies and his willingness to treat me as the authority figure in this house. I'll review the quotes this evening, I tell him, settling back into my garden chair with the satisfaction of someone whose opinions actually matter. And I want to discuss updating the lease agreement when it comes up for renewal next month. I'm thinking about adding some clauses about family respect and communication standards. The suggestion makes him nervous, which is exactly the reaction I'm looking for. Peter runs over from his swing set with grass stains on his knees and pure joy on his face. Grandma Helen, can we plant more flowers next spring? Maybe some of those big purple ones you showed me in the garden magazine? His enthusiasm for our shared gardening projects has become one of the bright spots in this complicated family situation, proof that children adapt better than adults to new realities. Of course, sweetheart, I tell him, pulling him close for a hug that smells like sunshine and childhood adventures. This is our house, and we can plant whatever makes us happy. The possessive pronoun isn't lost on Tony and Pepper, who exchange a look that acknowledges their continued dependence on my goodwill for their housing security and family stability. My phone rings with a call from Margaret, who has transformed from skeptical sister to enthusiastic supporter since hearing the recording of my kitchen confrontation. Helen, I wanted to let you know that David finished paying back that trade school loan, and he's planning to send you a thank you card for helping him when nobody else would. The family rehabilitation project has been ongoing, with relatives suddenly remembering years of support and assistance they had conveniently forgotten. That's nice, but not necessary, I reply, though I'm touched by the gesture. The money was never the point, and collecting old debts feels petty now that I've won the larger war for respect and recognition. What matters is that my family members have finally acknowledged the pattern of taking me for granted and are making genuine efforts to treat me better. After hanging up, I notice that Pepper is still standing nearby, clearly wanting to say something more substantial than pleasantries about Thanksgiving arrangements. The nervous energy radiating from her suggests this conversation is going to be more significant than discussions about houseguests and holiday meals. Is there something else you need to discuss? I ask, giving her permission to speak while maintaining the authority dynamic that governs our relationship. I wanted to apologize, she begins, her voice barely above a whisper. Just for calling you a burden, but for everything that led up to that moment. I was jealous of your relationship with Tony and Peter, and I felt threatened by how much they loved and respected you. The admission costs her something, and I can see the effort it takes to voice insecurities that she's probably never acknowledged to herself. The honesty surprises me, though I'm careful not to let my guard down completely. Pepper has shown me her capacity for manipulation and cruelty, and one moment of vulnerability doesn't erase months of calculated disrespect. Thank you for saying that, I respond carefully. But actions matter more than apologies. Show me that you understand my value to this family through how you treat me going forward. I will, she promises. And there's something in her voice that suggests she might actually mean it this time. I've learned that pushing you away only made everyone's life harder, including mine. Peter adores you. Tony needs your wisdom, and honestly, I could use your guidance too, if you're willing to share it. The request for mentorship represents a complete reversal from the woman who once saw me as competition. As the sun sets over my beautiful property, I reflect on the strange journey that brought me from eviction notice to property ownership, from family burden to respected matriarch. The house that was once Tony and Pepper's dream home has become my castle, the place where I finally learned to use power wisely and demand the respect I should have been given all along. The transformation hasn't been easy for anyone, but it's created a family dynamic based on honesty rather than convenient fiction. Tony approaches with Peter's homework folder, another small gesture that shows his commitment to including me in parenting decisions rather than working around me. Mom, Peter's teacher wants to meet with us about putting him in the gifted program. Would you like to come to the meeting? Your opinion matters to us. The invitation to participate in major family decisions represents the complete reversal of my former status as unwelcome interference. I'll review the quotes this evening, I tell him, settling back into my garden chair with the satisfaction of someone whose opinions actually matter. And I want to discuss updating the lease agreement when it comes up for renewal next month. I'm thinking about adding some clauses about family respect and communication standards. The suggestion makes him nervous, which is exactly the reaction I'm looking for. Peter runs over from his swing set with grass stains on his knees and pure joy on his face. Grandma Helen, can we plant more flowers next spring? Maybe some of those big purple ones you showed me in the garden magazine? His enthusiasm for our shared gardening projects has become one of the bright spots in this complicated family situation, proof that children adapt better than adults to new realities. Of course, sweetheart, I tell him, pulling him close for a hug that smells like sunshine and childhood adventures. This is our house, and we can plant whatever makes us happy. The possessive pronoun isn't lost on Tony and Pepper, who exchange a look that acknowledges their continued dependence on my goodwill for their housing security and family stability. My phone rings with a call from Margaret, who has transformed from skeptical sister to enthusiastic supporter since hearing the recording of my kitchen confrontation. Helen, I wanted to let you know that David finished paying back that trade school loan, and he's planning to send you a thank you card for helping him when nobody else would. The family rehabilitation project has been ongoing, with relatives suddenly remembering years of support and assistance they had conveniently forgotten. That's nice, but not necessary, I reply, though I'm touched by the gesture. The money was never the point, and collecting old debts feels petty now that I've won the larger war for respect and recognition. What matters is that my family members have finally acknowledged the pattern of taking me for granted and are making genuine efforts to treat me better. After hanging up, I notice that Pepper is still standing nearby, clearly wanting to say something more substantial than pleasantries about Thanksgiving arrangements. The nervous energy radiating from her suggests this conversation is going to be more significant than discussions about houseguests and holiday meals. Is there something else you need to discuss? I ask, giving her permission to speak while maintaining the authority dynamic that governs our relationship. I wanted to apologize, she begins, her voice barely above a whisper. Just for calling you a burden, but for everything that led up to that moment. I was jealous of your relationship with Tony and Peter, and I felt threatened by how much they loved and respected you. The admission costs her something, and I can see the effort it takes to voice insecurities that she's probably never acknowledged to herself. The honesty surprises me, though I'm careful not to let my guard down completely. Pepper has shown me her capacity for manipulation and cruelty, and one moment of vulnerability doesn't erase months of calculated disrespect. Thank you for saying that, I respond carefully. But actions matter more than apologies. Show me that you understand my value to this family through how you treat me going forward. I will, she promises. And there's something in her voice that suggests she might actually mean it this time. I've learned that pushing you away only made everyone's life harder, including mine. Peter adores you. Tony needs your wisdom, and honestly, I could use your guidance too, if you're willing to share it. The request for mentorship represents a complete reversal from the woman who once saw me as competition. As the sun sets over my beautiful property, I reflect on the strange journey that brought me from eviction notice to property ownership, from family burden to respected matriarch. The house that was once Tony and Pepper's dream home has become my castle, the place where I finally learned to use power wisely and demand the respect I should have been given all along. The transformation hasn't been easy for anyone, but it's created a family dynamic based on honesty rather than convenient fiction. Tony approaches with Peter's homework folder, another small gesture that shows his commitment to including me in parenting decisions rather than working around me. Mom, Peter's teacher wants to meet with us about putting him in the gifted program. Would you like to come to the meeting? Your opinion matters to us. The invitation to participate in major family decisions represents the complete reversal of my former status as unwelcome interference. I'd be honored, I tell him, and I mean it sincerely. This is what I wanted all along. Not power for its own sake, but recognition as a valuable family member whose contributions and opinions matter. The path to get here was harder than it should have been, but the destination has been worth every difficult conversation and uncomfortable boundary-setting session. As we all head inside for dinner, Peter between me and Tony, while Pepper holds the door open respectfully, I realize that I've accomplished something remarkable. I've transformed from the family member everyone tolerated into the family member everyone respects, and I've done it without sacrificing my values or becoming the kind of person who hurts others for sport. The burden they tried to discard has become the foundation that holds this family together, and everyone finally understands that my strength was always the family's strength, even when they were too blind to see it. The house that represents my victory feels warm and welcoming as we settle around the dinner table, four people who have learned hard lessons about power, respect, and the true meaning of family. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and negotiations, but tonight we're simply a family sharing a meal in a home where everyone knows exactly where they stand and what they owe each other. Sometimes the best revenge is building something better from the wreckage of what came before.